Cop releases snake on black baby. What the father did next is unbelievable. Have you ever imagined the horror of seeing your 8-month-old baby attacked by a snake in a public park, only to discover that a police officer deliberately released the animal? In Chicago, this shocking story happened to the Johnson family, and the aftermath of this tragedy changed the city's security system forever. Leave a like, hit the bell, and comment which city you're watching this incredible story from. Marcus Johnson, 32, was a university professor living with his wife Anna and their son Michael in the south side of Chicago. The family often spent their Sunday afternoons in Washington Park, a ritual that became even more special after little Michael's birth. What they didn't imagine was that their moment of peace would be shattered by a man sworn to protect them. It all started when Marcus filed a complaint against police brutality he witnessed in his neighborhood. 3 young black men were assaulted without cause, and he couldn't stay silent in the face of injustice. What he didn't know was that his action would awaken the fury of Sergeant Robert Miller, known for his problematic history in the department. On that Sunday, March 15th, the sky was especially blue. Anna was spreading a blanket on the grass, while Marcus took Michael out of the stroller. Families around were having picnics. Children were running and playing ball. A perfect afternoon, until security cameras in the park recorded something disturbing, a uniformed man approaching discreetly with a box. What happened in the next few minutes is recorded not only on cameras, but in the memory of dozens of witnesses. The rattlesnake, strategically released near where Michael was playing, caused widespread panic. The desperate screams of parents mixed with the cries of children as everyone ran in desperation. Marcus, always known for his calm and rationality, saw his world crumble when he realized the attack was not accidental. The camera footage revealed much more than a simple incident. What this father did upon discovering the truth behind the attack is so shocking that we need to divide this story into parts. How would a man who dedicated his life to teaching and justice react when he discovers his son was deliberately put in mortal danger by someone sworn to protect society? Is there justice when the criminal wears a badge? And how far can a father go to protect his family when the system fails? Marcus Johnson's life had never been easy. The son of a single mother who worked multiple jobs, he earned his spot at Northwestern University through relentless study, eventually becoming a professor of African American studies. His wife, Anna, a nurse at Cook County Hospital, met him during a community outreach program in the South Side. The couple represented resilience and overcoming in a society still marked by inequality. Sergeant Robert Miller had a very different story. Coming from a long line of Chicago police officers, he carried the weight of 3 generations of crime fighting. His father, known as Captain Iron Fist, had been dismissed from the force for violent conduct, and Robert grew up believing his father had been wronged by the system. Washington Park, the scene of the attack, wasn't just a recreational space. It was a historical meeting point for the local black community, where Sunday jazz concerts and civil rights gatherings took place. For Miller, the park represented a threat to order, especially after the protests against police violence that had started to happen there. After the snake incident, the community began revealing other cases of abuse involving Miller. Mama Rose, who ran a popular soul food stand in the park, reported how he would patrol specifically on days of African American cultural events. Jamal, a teenager who frequented the area, told of constant violent stop and frisks he endured. Little Michael, even at just 8 months old, already showed a remarkable personality. His smiles lit up the park every Sunday, and he was known as the Prince of Washington Park by the regulars. Anna always said he had the same determined eyes as his father, eyes that now carried a mix of fear and defiance. The investigation into the attack revealed a disturbing pattern. Miller wasn't acting alone. There was a network of officers sharing messages in closed groups, planning intimidation actions against activists and their families. Marcus had become a target after his complaints started gaining traction on social media. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Michael was recovering from the shock. The doctors assured that the snake hadn't bitten the baby, but the psychological trauma on the family was evident. Anna couldn't sleep anymore, waking up several times during the night to check the crib. Marcus spent hours watching the security cameras he had installed throughout the house. Tension in the community increased each day. Other parents began avoiding the park, fearing retaliation. The space that was once a symbol of unity and resistance now carried a shadow of fear. But something was about to change. Marcus uncovered information about Miller that no one could have imagined. Among the documents that began arriving anonymously in his mailbox were records of similar actions in different neighborhoods across the city. Black families being systematically intimidated, always with the same modus operandi. Indirect attacks, difficult to prove, but devastating in their impact. What Marcus didn't know was that his next discovery would completely change the course of this story. On his desk at the university, a brown envelope awaited him, with information that would make the snake case seem like just the tip of a much darker iceberg. The discovery in the brown envelope chilled Marcus's blood. Photos, documents, and a USB drive revealed that Miller led a group self-dubbed the Guardians of Order, responsible for terrorizing black families across various Chicago neighborhoods. Most shocking, there was a systematic plan to force these families out of areas undergoing gentrification. During a tense meeting with other university professors, Marcus discovered he wasn't the only target. 3 other black faculty members had suffered unexplainable accidents after reporting cases of police violence. One had his car sabotaged, another found his house mysteriously flooded, and the third had his dog poisoned. The situation worsened when Anna, returning from her night shift at the hospital, was followed by a patrol car. The police vehicle kept its headlights off and only backed away when she entered the emergency room parking lot. That same night, all security cameras along her route mysteriously malfunctioned. Michael began showing signs of trauma. The once sociable and smiley baby now cried uncontrollably at the sight of anyone in uniform. Doctors recommended early psychological intervention, rare for such a young child. Anna had to take leave from work to care for their son full-time. The official investigation into the snake incident seemed stalled. Witnesses began changing their testimonies. Security footage disappeared mysteriously, and the detective in charge of the case increasingly suggested it had been just an unfortunate accident. Marcus, however, was no longer alone. A group of activist lawyers, led by attorney Helena Washington, began gathering evidence. They uncovered a pattern. In the last 5 years, 23 black families had moved out of the neighborhood after inexplicable incidents. All occurrences happened in areas where large real estate developers were planning new projects. The noose began to tighten when a young officer, Ryan Adams, secretly approached Marcus. Trembling and constantly looking over his shoulder, he revealed that Miller kept a list of priority targets on his personal computer. Marcus and his family were at the top of that list. "He's got contacts everywhere," Ryan whispered. "Judges, prosecutors, businessmen. It's bigger than you can imagine. The attack on your son was just a warning. They're planning something bigger." That same night, as Marcus was typing an email to his lawyer, all the lights in his house went out. The phone wasn't working. The internet was down. In the pitch-black, heavy footsteps were heard in the backyard. Anna grabbed Michael and ran to the panic room they had recently installed, a precaution that now seemed frighteningly necessary. Marcus, heart racing, grabbed his cell phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Then he saw it. A message had arrived seconds before the power outage. It was a video. In the footage, Miller appeared at his desk, smiling directly at the camera as he said, Professor, haven't you learned yet that some people need to know their place?" The sound of breaking glass downstairs confirmed his worst fears. But what the intruders didn't know was that Marcus was prepared. In recent weeks, he had installed an independent security system powered by batteries. And what the cameras of this system recorded that night would change everything. The discovery in the brown envelope chilled Marcus's blood. Photos, documents, and a USB drive revealed that Miller led a group self-dubbed the Guardians of Order, responsible for terrorizing black families across various Chicago neighborhoods. Most shocking, there was a systematic plan to force these families out of areas undergoing gentrification. During a tense meeting with other university professors, Marcus discovered he wasn't the only target. 3 other black faculty members had suffered unexplainable accidents after reporting cases of police violence. One had his car sabotaged, another found his house mysteriously flooded, and the third had his dog poisoned. The situation worsened when Anna, returning from her night shift at the hospital, was followed by a patrol car. The police vehicle kept its headlights off and only backed away when she entered the emergency room parking lot. That same night, all security cameras along her route mysteriously malfunctioned. Michael began showing signs of trauma. The once sociable and smiley baby now cried uncontrollably at the sight of anyone in uniform. Doctors recommended early psychological intervention, rare for such a young child. Anna had to take leave from work to care for their son full-time. The official investigation into the snake incident seemed stalled. Witnesses began changing their testimonies. Security footage disappeared mysteriously, and the detective in charge of the case increasingly suggested it had been just an unfortunate accident. Marcus, however, was no longer alone. A group of activist lawyers, led by attorney Helena Washington, began gathering evidence. They uncovered a pattern. In the last 5 years, 23 black families had moved out of the neighborhood after inexplicable incidents. All occurrences happened in areas where large real estate developers were planning new projects. The noose began to tighten when a young officer, Ryan Adams, secretly approached Marcus. Trembling and constantly looking over his shoulder, he revealed that Miller kept a list of priority targets on his personal computer. Marcus and his family were at the top of that list. "He's got contacts everywhere," Ryan whispered. "Judges, prosecutors, businessmen. It's bigger than you can imagine. The attack on your son was just a warning. They're planning something bigger." That same night, as Marcus was typing an email to his lawyer, all the lights in his house went out. The phone wasn't working. The internet was down. In the pitch black, heavy footsteps were heard in the backyard. Anna grabbed Michael and ran to the panic room they had recently installed, a precaution that now seemed frighteningly necessary. Marcus, heart racing, grabbed his cell phone to call for help. But there was no signal. Then he saw it. A message had arrived seconds before the power outage. It was a video. In the footage, Miller appeared at his desk, smiling directly at the camera as he said, Professor, haven't you learned yet that some people need to know their place?" The sound of breaking glass downstairs confirmed his worst fears. But what the intruders didn't know was that Marcus was prepared. In recent weeks, he had installed an independent security system powered by batteries. And what the cameras of this system recorded that night would change everything. As Marcus watched the live feed on his hidden tablet, he saw 3 masked men entering his living room. They were methodically searching the house, communicating via hand signals. Their movements were too precise, too practiced. These weren't common burglars. In the panic room, Anna held Michael close, trying to keep him quiet. The baby, sensing the tension, remained unusually still. Marcus's mind raced, weighing their options. The panic room could hold them safely for hours, but what then? How deep did this conspiracy go? Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police, but could they trust them? Marcus's finger hovered over the panic button that would alert the authorities directly. In that moment of hesitation, he saw something on the camera feed that made his blood run cold. One of the intruders had removed his mask. It was a face Marcus recognized, not Miller, but someone equally shocking. As the man looked directly at the hidden camera, a cruel smile spread across his face. He knew they were watching. In that moment, Marcus realized the true scope of what they were up against. This wasn't just about corrupt cops or local politics. The rabbit hole went much deeper, reaching into the highest levels of Chicago's power structure. As dawn broke, the Johnson family emerged from their panic room into a world forever changed. The evidence captured that night would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the city to its core. But for Marcus, Anna, and little Michael, the fight for justice was just beginning. As tension mounted in the Johnson household, other stories began to intertwine. Attorney Helena Washington discovered that Mama Rose, the soul food vendor, wasn't just a witness. She was the widow of a black police officer who died under mysterious circumstances after threatening to expose a corruption scheme led by Miller. At the hospital where Anna worked, a veteran nurse, Doris Wilson, discreetly approached her during a shift. With tears in her eyes, she revealed that her son had been tortured by Miller's team 5 years ago. "They have a place," she whispered. "An old abandoned precinct on the south side. That's where they do their dirty work." Ryan, the young whistleblower cop, started gathering evidence about the connection between Miller's group and major real estate developers. He discovered that after each black family was forced to move, a specific realtor would appear offering to buy the houses at well below market prices. But Ryan didn't tell Marcus everything. He kept to himself the most dangerous information. He had found a list of influential politicians who were receiving money to ignore complaints against Miller. Among the names was that of his own father, a state representative. At the university, other professors began noticing subtle changes. Security cameras mysteriously turned off during their classes, important emails never arriving, students disappearing from their courses without explanation. A silent fear spread through the academic corridors. Anna, during her sleepless nights, started organizing a virtual support group for other victimized families. In just 1 week, more than 50 people from the area identified themselves as targets of police intimidation. They all had something in common. They were black and lived in areas of real estate interest. Little Michael, even so young, became an involuntary symbol of resistance. His photo, taken days before the snake attack, went viral on social media. The baby's innocent smile contrasted with the hashtag Justice for Michael, which was already reaching millions of shares. Meanwhile, at the precinct where he worked, Miller began showing signs of nervousness. His subordinates caught him destroying documents late at night. Security cameras recorded suspicious meetings with businessmen in empty parking lots. Marcus received an anonymous call, "Look for Operation Clean Slate." The trembling voice on the other end of the line belonged to a former cop who had worked with Miller. 10 years ago, they started with small threats. Now it's much bigger. Be careful of... The call dropped before he could finish the sentence. When Marcus tried to call back, he discovered that the number belonged to a man who had been found dead that morning, apparently from natural causes. Time was running out. Marcus knew he had to act before his family became another statistic. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, Miller was also planning his next move. And this time, it wouldn't be just a warning. As Marcus pondered his next move, a surprising ally emerged. Councilwoman Evelyn Torres, known for her anti-corruption stance, reached out through secure channels. "I've been building a case against these cops for months," she revealed. "Your situation might be the key to blowing this wide open." Meanwhile, Michael's trauma was having an unexpected effect on the community. Parents across Chicago, regardless of race, began sharing stories of police misconduct involving children. A grassroots movement, Protect Our Kids, started organizing peaceful demonstrations outside police precincts. The media, initially hesitant to cover the story, couldn't ignore it any longer. National news outlets picked up on the Johnson family's ordeal, turning Marcus and Anna into reluctant spokespersons for police reform. As pressure mounted, cracks began to show in Miller's network. Junior officers, inspired by Ryan's bravery, started coming forward with their own stories of misconduct they'd witnessed. With each passing day, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility growing. He wasn't just fighting for his family anymore, he had become the face of a movement. As he prepared for a crucial press conference that could change everything, he couldn't help but wonder at what cost would justice finally be served. The day began with a shocking discovery. Ryan's body was found in his apartment. Official version, suicide. But a flash drive hidden in a cereal box reached Marcus through Nurse Doris. The message was clear. If you're seeing this, I'm already dead. The contents of the flash drive were explosive. Videos of secret meetings between Miller, businessmen and politicians, openly discussing the social cleansing of targeted neighborhoods. Spreadsheets detailing payments, names of families marked for intimidation, and something even more disturbing, a plan called Final Phase, scheduled to happen in 48 hours. Marcus barely had time to process the information when he received a frantic call from Anna. Michael had disappeared from daycare. The teacher in charge, pale and shaking, said a police officer had presented official documents claiming a family emergency. Desperation turned to fury when Marcus received a video on his cell phone. Michael was in a crib, seemingly asleep, while Miller's voice narrated, "Beautiful son you have, Professor. It'd be a shame if he grew up without a father, or didn't grow up at all." But Miller made a crucial mistake. In the video, an apparently insignificant detail revealed the location. A partially visible calendar on the wall showed the logo of the old precinct, mentioned by Doris. In a desperate move, Marcus simultaneously contacted Attorney Washington, investigative journalists, and Black Lives Matter activists. Within minutes, social media exploded with the hashtag, "Where is Michael?" Mainstream media, which had been ignoring the case until then, could no longer maintain silence. Ryan's father, the state representative, devastated by his son's death, decided to break the silence. In an emergency press conference, he exposed the entire scheme, including his own participation. "My son died trying to do the right thing. I can't let his sacrifice be in vain." As police cars converged on the old precinct, Marcus received one last message from Miller. "You think you've won? Come here alone. No police, no press. Or your son will pay the price for your arrogance." Udrish. What happened in the next few hours would forever change the landscape of law enforcement in Chicago. Marcus, the professor who had always advocated nonviolence, was about to make a choice that would challenge everything he believed in. With the flash drive in one pocket and a gun borrowed from Mama Rose in the other, Marcus drove to the old precinct. In the passenger seat, a folder contained documents he never imagined he'd use. The last card against a system corrupted to the core. As he parked in front of the abandoned building, Marcus sent a final message to Anna. "Forgive me for what I'm about to do, but our son deserves a better world." What he didn't know was that Anna, at that very moment, also had a plan in motion. Marcus entered the dimly lit precinct, his heart pounding. The musty smell of abandonment mixed with something more sinister. On the second floor, he found Miller sitting behind an old desk, Michael sleeping in a makeshift crib beside him. "Finally, we meet properly, Professor," Miller said, a cold smile on his face. "You know, you could have avoided all this. Just needed to stay quiet like everyone else." What Miller didn't know was that every word of his was being broadcast live. Anna, working with activist hackers, had managed to remotely access Marcus's phone, turning it into a hidden camera. Thousands of people were watching in real time. "You really think you can change the system?" Miller taunted, slowly standing up. "This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. There will always be people like me to keep order." Meanwhile, outside, a silent operation was unfolding. Attorney Washington had activated a special task force from the FBI, the only ones they could trust. "You know why I chose a snake that day?" Miller continued, approaching the crib. "Because you people need to learn to crawl. That's how the world works. It was at this moment that Marcus revealed his trump card. No, Miller. This is how the world works. He threw onto the desk compromising photos of the sergeant with businessmen, politicians, and drug dealers. Every copy of these photos is being sent to every newsroom in the country right now. Miller's face transformed into a mask of fury. He drew his gun, but before he could aim, a deafening sound of breaking glass filled the room. Tactical teams simultaneously entered through all windows. FBI, freeze! What followed was controlled chaos. Miller, cornered, still tried to use Michael as a shield, but didn't count on Anna's presence, who had infiltrated the building with the medical support team. In seconds, she rescued her son while agents subdued the sergeant. As dawn broke over Chicago, the Johnsons huddled together, finally safe. The city would never be the same, and their fight was far from over. But for the first time in months, hope glimmered on the horizon. In the weeks following the confrontation at the abandoned precinct, the repercussions spread like a shockwave. Dozens of corrupt police officers were arrested. 3 major real estate developers had their executives indicted. Politicians resigned en masse. Families who had been forced out of their neighborhoods began receiving compensation, but the price of victory was high. Marcus received death threats and had to temporarily enter the witness protection program. Anna was suspended from the hospital after attempts to sabotage her medical equipment were discovered. The Johnson family story became a landmark in the movement for racial justice in America. The video of the final confrontation went viral internationally, exposing a system of oppression that had been operating in the shadows for decades. Miller, now in preventive custody, still had dangerous connections. From his cell, he made one last threat. "This isn't over, Professor. Some people can't be locked up forever." Meanwhile, Chicago was in turmoil. Peaceful protests filled the streets daily, demanding systemic change in law enforcement. The mayor, under immense pressure, announced a complete overhaul of the police department, including independent oversight and mandatory anti-racism training. The media frenzy was relentless. Marcus and Anna found themselves thrust into the national spotlight, appearing on talk shows and news programs. Their story resonated far beyond Chicago, sparking similar investigations in cities across the country. At the university, Marcus's colleagues rallied around him. The African American Studies Department saw a surge in enrollment as students, inspired by his courage, sought to understand and combat systemic racism. Anna's support group for families affected by police violence grew exponentially. She partnered with national civil rights organizations to create a nationwide network of support and legal aid. Little Michael, now a toddler, showed remarkable resilience. Child psychologists studying his case noted how the love and determination of his parents had mitigated the trauma of his early experiences. The legal battle was far from over. As the trials of Miller and his accomplices approached, the Johnsons found themselves at the center of a legal storm. Defense attorneys tried to paint Marcus as a radical agitator, while prosecutors hailed him as a hero. Unexpected allies emerged. Several honest police officers, inspired by Ryan's sacrifice, formed a group called Guardians for Real Justice, advocating for reform from within the force. The Operation Clean Slate documents revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond Chicago. Federal investigations were launched in several states, uncovering similar patterns of gentrification-driven harassment. Marcus struggled with the weight of his newfound fame. He was offered book deals, speaking engagements, even suggestions of running for office. But all he wanted was a normal life for his family. Anna faced her own battles. Some colleagues at the hospital, fearful of association, distanced themselves. But others, especially minority staff, rallied around her, forming a protective circle. As the dust began to settle, the Johnsons had to make a difficult decision: stay in Chicago and continue the fight directly, or relocate for their safety and work for change from afar. Their decision would not only impact their lives, but potentially the future of the movement they had inadvertently sparked. In a quiet moment at home, Marcus looked at Anna and Michael, reflecting on their journey. "When this all started," he said, "I just wanted to protect our family. I never imagined we'd end up here." Anna, holding his hand, replied, "Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air. What we did was unleash that storm." Michael, playing at their feet, looked up and innocently asked, "Daddy, Mommy, did we save the world?" Marcus and Anna exchanged glances, smiling. "No, son," Marcus answered, "but we helped people realize they can save the world together." As the sun set on a transformed Chicago, the Johnson family knew their journey, and that of the country was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright, full of possibilities and hope. 6 months passed since the confrontation at the abandoned precinct. The Johnson family, now protected in a small town outside of Chicago, faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives. Marcus, once confined to classrooms, now found himself a national voice in the fight against systemic racism and police corruption. Anna, determined not to be just a victim, initiated a psychological support program for families affected by police violence. Her work attracted the attention of international human rights organizations, which began using the Johnson case as a case study in global training programs. Michael, now almost 2 years old, still carried trauma from the kidnapping. Child therapists worked intensively to help him overcome his fear of uniforms and loud noises. Slowly, his contagious smile began to reappear, but the fight was far from over. Even with Miller in prison, his network of influence still operated in the shadows. Marcus regularly received veiled threats, and attempts to discredit his testimony constantly appeared in the media. It was in this scenario that Marcus decided to take the next step. Using his academic experience and the knowledge acquired in recent months, he began writing a book exposing the mechanisms of institutional racism in American law enforcement. "It's not enough to punish individuals," Marcus explained in an interview. "We need to dismantle an entire system that allows people like Miller to thrive." Meanwhile, in prison, Miller faced his own challenges. Isolated from former allies and fearing for his life, he began to consider making a plea deal. The information leaked, and suddenly several of his former accomplices began to approach authorities in a race to see who would give up more first. Attorney Helena Washington, now leading a special task force, worked tirelessly to connect the dots. Each new revelation exposed deeper ramifications of the scheme, reaching high levels of government and the judiciary. Marcus and Anna, despite constant fear, refused to live in hiding. "Our silence is what they want," Anna said in her online support groups. "Every time we share our stories, we weaken their power over us." The couple decided to use their visibility for something bigger. They founded Project Hope, an initiative to offer legal and psychological support to victims of police violence and their families. The project quickly gained supporters and expanded to other cities. In a surprising gesture, some honest police officers, inspired by the courage of the Johnson family, began to speak out. An internal movement formed in the police force, seeking reforms and greater transparency. Marcus's personal transformation was evident. The once shy professor now spoke confidently at public hearings and televised debates. "Every threat I receive reminds me that we're on the right path," he declared in an emotional speech to Congress. Anna, for her part, returned to work as a nurse, but now in a clinic specializing in treating survivors of violence. Her personal experience brought unique empathy to the treatment. Michael, growing up amidst all this, began to show signs of extraordinary resilience. One afternoon in the park, to the surprise and emotion of his parents, he approached a police officer to offer a flower. The moment, captured by a passerby and shared on social media, became a powerful symbol. The image of little Michael, son of a man who challenged a corrupt system, offering a flower to a representative of that same system, touched hearts across the country. As night fell on the Johnsons' new home, Marcus looked out the window, reflecting on the journey of recent months. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Hope. "You know," he said to Anna, who was putting Michael to bed, "when all this started, I thought we were fighting against something. Now I realize we're fighting for something." Anna nodded, a tired but determined smile on her face. "We're fighting for Michael's future, for all the Michaels out there." The next morning, as Marcus prepared for another day of interviews and meetings, he received an unexpected call. It was from the White House. The president wanted to meet with him to discuss nationwide police reform. As he hung up the phone, Marcus looked at a photo of his family on the desk. They had been through hell, but they had emerged stronger, more determined, and now they had the chance to create real, lasting change. "Ready for the next chapter?" Anna asked, sensing the weight of the moment. Marcus took a deep breath, nodded, and replied, "Together, we're ready for anything." A year had passed since the incident at the abandoned precinct. The Johnson case had become a catalyst for significant changes in the U.S. law enforcement system, but the gears of corruption were still turning behind the scenes. Marcus received an anonymous phone call. "Get ready. They're planning something big to silence you once and for all." The trembling voice on the other end belonged to an insider, someone who had finally decided they couldn't stay silent anymore. Meanwhile, Anna discovered that her clinic for violence survivors was being investigated for alleged tax irregularities, a clear attempt at intimidation. Project Hope also faced mysterious bureaucratic obstacles, delaying its expansion to other regions of the country. Attorney Helena Washington, working tirelessly behind the scenes, managed to intercept encrypted communications between remaining members of Miller's group. The messages indicated an ongoing plan, something called Operation Final Cleanse. Marcus, feeling the pressure mounting, decided it was time for a bold move. He announced that he would be giving a series of lectures at universities across America, publicly exposing all the details of the corruption scheme they had uncovered. "If they want to silence me," Marcus said at a press conference, "they'll have to do it with the whole world watching." News of the lectures spread like wildfire. Thousands of people signed up to attend, while international human rights groups announced they would send observers to ensure Marcus's safety. Behind the scenes, a silent battle was unfolding. Helena's team worked day and night to unravel the enigma of Operation Final Cleanse. Each clue led them deeper into a web of corruption that seemed to have no end. Anna, determined not to be intimidated, intensified her work at the clinic. She began collecting video testimonials from survivors, creating a powerful archive that would be impossible to ignore. Michael, now almost 3 years old, was beginning to understand that his family was different. "Are Daddy and Mommy heroes?" he asked innocently one day. The question hit Marcus and Anna like lightning, reminding them of the weight of their responsibility. Tension reached its peak when, on the eve of Marcus's first lecture, the Johnson family received a package. Inside, they found recent photos of them in various places, at the park, at Michael's school, at the supermarket. The message was clear: "We're watching you." But instead of backing down, Marcus and Anna decided to use this to their advantage. In a live social media broadcast, they showed the photos and challenged their stalkers. "You think you intimidate us," Marcus said, his voice firm. "But each threat only proves we're on the right path. And we are not alone." Social media exploded with messages of support. Hashtags like "We Stand With the Johnsons" and "Silence Breakers" became worldwide trending topics. On the night before the lecture, Marcus, Anna, and Helena met for a final security review. It was then that Helena received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. "Operation Final Cleanse is not what you think. The target is not Marcus. It's something much bigger." As they tried to decipher the meaning of this new information, Marcus looked out the hotel window. Down below, a crowd was already forming, people of all ages holding signs of support. Tomorrow, Marcus thought, everything will change. For better or worse, there was no turning back. The stage was set for the final confrontation between truth and those who would do anything to keep it buried. As dawn broke, Marcus received one last piece of information that shook him to his core. A list of names, politicians, judges, business leaders, all implicated in the corruption scheme. And at the top of the list, a name that made his blood run cold. With trembling hands, he dialed Anna's number. "We need to change the plan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's bigger than we ever imagined." As he hung up, Marcus looked at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't just a professor anymore. He was the spark that could ignite a revolution. And in a few hours, he would step onto a stage that could change the course of history. The auditorium at Harvard University was packed. Thousands more crowded outside, watching on giant screens. The tension was palpable. Marcus Johnson stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause, but his face showed the gravity of the moment. "Today," he began, "I'm not just here to tell my story. I'm here to expose a system that has been eroding the foundations of our society for decades." As Marcus spoke, Helena and her team frantically monitored communications. Something was wrong. Operation Final Cleanse seemed to be in motion, but not as they expected. Suddenly the lights in the auditorium flickered. The screens behind Marcus went black for a moment, and then chaos. Confidential documents, incriminating emails, audio recordings, an avalanche of information began to be displayed on the screens. It wasn't just about Miller or the local police. It was a massive exposure of corruption that reached the highest echelons of government, the judiciary, and major corporations. Marcus, stunned, realized he was no longer in control of his own presentation. Someone, or something, had hacked the system. In the midst of the confusion, Anna, who was in the front row, received a message. "Protect Michael, now." Without hesitation, she ran outside, where their son was under the care of a security team. Meanwhile, in the streets, spontaneous demonstrations began to form. The revelations, broadcast live to the entire country, triggered a chain reaction. Crowds gathered in front of police stations, courthouses, and government headquarters. Back in the auditorium, Marcus tried to maintain calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't plan this, but what we're seeing here is the naked truth that they've tried to hide from us for so long." It was then that Helena rushed onto the stage, whispering something in Marcus's ear. His face went pale. "We've just received information that arrest attempts are being made at this very moment against several politicians, judges, and businessmen implicated in these revelations," Marcus announced, his voice trembling slightly. The auditorium erupted in shouts and applause, but the celebration was short-lived. A group of armed men stormed the venue, causing panic. "Everybody freeze!" shouted the leader of the group. "This ends now." But they didn't count on the reaction of the crowd. In an act of collective courage, people in the auditorium stood up, forming a human barrier between the invaders and Marcus. At that crucial moment, a familiar voice echoed through the speakers. "Attention! This is FBI Director Thompson. The building is surrounded. Lower your weapons immediately." The invaders, seeing themselves cornered, had no choice but to surrender. As they were led away, Marcus recognized familiar faces among them, politicians and businessmen who had been operating in the shadows for years. With the immediate danger neutralized, Marcus turned his attention to the source of the massive information leak. It was then that he noticed an elderly man at the back of the auditorium holding a laptop. Their eyes met, and the man nodded slightly before disappearing into the crowd. Hours later, with the situation under control, Marcus reunited with Anna, Michael, and Helena in a secure room. The entire country was in an uproar. Arrests were being made every minute. Demonstrations were taking over the streets of every major city. "What happened today," said Helena, "was beyond anything we could have imagined. Someone on the inside, someone with access to everything, decided to blow up the entire system." Marcus, exhausted but determined, looked at his family. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's just the beginning of a long battle for true justice." Anna, holding Michael in her arms, agreed. "But this time, we're not alone. The whole country has woken up." As night fell over Cambridge, the Johnson family watched from the window the lights of thousands of candles in a spontaneous vigil that had formed in front of the university. It was a symbol of hope. That light was finally being shed on the shadows that had dominated the country for so long. Operation Final Cleanse had turned against its own creators, and a new chapter in American history was about to begin. In the days that followed, the repercussions were seismic. Massive protests erupted in every major city, demanding accountability and reform. Congress called for emergency sessions to address the revelations. International allies expressed shock and concern, some even calling for UN intervention. Wall Street experienced its biggest drop since the 2008 financial crisis, as implicated corporations saw their stocks plummet. A wave of resignations swept through government agencies, corporations, and law enforcement. As Marcus and Anna watched the news, holding Michael close, they realized that their fight for justice had sparked a revolution. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers, but for the first time they felt the weight of hope, not just for their family, but for the entire nation. In the months following the event at Harvard University, America underwent an unprecedented transformation. The Johnson effect, as it became known, triggered a wave of changes that touched every level of society. Marcus, now a national figure, was invited to lead a special commission for reforming the law enforcement system. His personal experience and academic knowledge proved invaluable in restructuring police forces, focusing on anti-racism training and greater accountability. Anna expanded Project Hope into a national organization, offering psychological and legal support to victims of police violence and their families. Her holistic approach to healing and justice became a model studied internationally. Little Michael, now 4 years old, became an involuntary symbol of hope. His photo offering a flower to a police officer was transformed into a giant mural in the center of Chicago, representing the possibility of reconciliation and change. Miller, sentenced to decades in prison, surprisingly asked to speak with Marcus. In a tense and emotional meeting, he offered an apology and crucial information about still operating corruption networks, showing that even the most unlikely can seek redemption. The identity of the mysterious hacker who exposed the massive corruption was never officially revealed, though theories abounded. Some said it was a group of honest cops, others bet on an international network of activists. The mystery only added to the legend of the Johnson case. Legislative reforms were passed in record time, strengthening anti-corruption laws and establishing more robust control mechanisms over police forces. America, once seen as a lost cause in terms of systemic corruption, was now studied as an example of how a society can mobilize for profound changes. It wasn't an easy path. Marcus and his family still faced occasional threats, and resistance to change was strong in certain sectors. But popular support was undeniable. Peaceful demonstrations regularly filled the streets, no longer in protest, but in celebration and continued vigilance. On a quiet evening, a year after the event at Harvard, the Johnson family gathered on their porch. Marcus, looking out at the city, reflected, "When all this started, I just wanted to protect our family. I never imagined we'd come this far." Anna, holding his hand, replied, "Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air. What we did was unleash that storm." Michael, playing at their feet, looked up and innocently asked, "Daddy, Mommy, did we save the world?" Marcus and Anna exchanged glances, smiling. "No, son," Marcus answered. "But we helped people realize they can save the world together." As the sun set on a transformed America, the Johnson family knew their journey, and that of the country was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright, full of possibilities and hope. 5 years after the events that shook America, the Johnson family continues to be a symbol of change and hope. Marcus, now Secretary of Justice, works tirelessly to keep reforms on track. Anna leads an international human rights NGO, inspiring global changes. Michael, at 9 years old, is a brilliant student and junior activist, using his story to inspire other children. America, while still facing challenges, is seen as an example of social and political transformation. The fight against racism and corruption continues, but now with an engaged and vigilant population. The Johnson story proves that a single family can indeed change an entire nation. Dear viewer, if you've made it this far, you've lived with us an incredible journey of courage, hope, and transformation. The story of Marcus, Anna, and Michael Johnson shows us that change is possible, even in the face of the greatest challenges. Now we want to hear from you. If you watched until the end, comment "I watched until the end" and share your thoughts. How did this story impact you? What would you do if you were in the Johnsons' place? Don't forget to click on the video appearing in the final screen. We have more inspiring stories waiting for you. Together, we can make a difference. Change starts with each of us.